You've got to believe me, David.
Believe what? That tomorrow night, beneath the full moon, I'll sprout hair and fangs and eat people? Bullshit.
Oh, God damn it, David, please believe me.
Welcome back, Wolves and Cubs, to the Complete Guide to Horror Movie podcast. I'm Coop. Beware the full moon. Today we're discussing An American Werewolf in London, the 1981 comedy horror film written and directed by John Landis, in which David and Jack, two American backpackers, are attacked by a werewolf. Now, this is a movie that I originally saw many years ago. I believe this was one that my mum showed me as like this is a classic. We need to watch this. Because she knew that I was getting into horror movies and that kind of thing as well. And I remember loving it. I think I was about 10 or 11 at the time.
Isn't this a fun place? Well, I like it here.
I don't think I'd actually seen it again until yesterday when I watched it with my partner.
All right. Keep on rolling, baby.
And was pleasantly surprised. It was way funnier than I remember. I think there was a lot of shit in this that I probably wouldn't have understood when I was younger as well. I picked this as just sort of as a classic. Let's look back and see how it's aged, see if it's aged well, see if we enjoy it.
No.
And see if it stands the test of time.
Nice looking group.
Hey, listen, at least it's warm in here.
I do remember seeing this ages and ages ago because I remember my mum being a fan of this as well. And I also do have to shout out to Yvonne. She's basically my second mother at this point. I love her so much. And I'm just going to say, so many times I had at your house, like so many great times watching horror movies.
Noreen? Is that you? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was my leg. Noreen. Sweet dreams, Masha.
And also specifically remember we were playing some board game and your mum screamed at the top of her lungs and it fucking terrified me.
I want to play with the old one now.
But that was part of the game. So, I'll always relate horror movies back to like our sleepovers and whatnot. For American Werewolf in London, I remember, so I have to confess, I actually watched American Werewolf in Paris first.
Dumbass.
And then I realized, shit, I watched the wrong movie. So very quickly watched American Werewolf in London. I love a lot of parts about this movie, in particular, the color grading. And I'll get into this later in the next segment, but I like the colors, I like the dialogue, I like the pacing of this movie. I also just love the fact that it's just a fearless werewolf movie. I find this is the original, and any other imitations so far have just been, well, kind of shit.
I heard nothing.
Like, it's almost always like a metaphor for werewolves, or like the only other werewolf movie I would consider is probably Wes Craven's Cursed, which, again, I watched at your place, Coop. So for me, it's like, those are the two movies that I'll automatically think of when it comes to like good werewolf movies. This one, though, is definitely way better than Cursed. No offense to Wes Craven, R.I.P. But I really like this.
I'm a werewolf.
I'm glad that you still equate horror with my mum. Same.
Are you all right now?
I don't know. I'll let you know the next full moon.
Pretty decent viewing. I thought the CGI was like pretty good for a 1981 movie, like still pretty good now. I thought the werewolf itself was good, even though it was a bit of CGI in that. I really liked the chemistry with the two guys at the start, and I thought they were brothers for a second. I had to look them up because they look so similar.
Definitely the transformation scene. I thought that they did a fantastic job with that. I particularly love the fact that the music that had been playing prior, he's relaxing. I think he's reading a book at the time, listening to music. I love that the music keeps playing. You saw me standing alone. Jesus Christ! Kind of adds like a darker tone to it because there's all this upbeat music happening as he's like freaking out. He doesn't know what's going on. He's sweating. His bones are breaking. I thought it was so well shot, and it's definitely one of those classic horror moments in history. And I feel like that's one of those scenes that people are going to be talking about in another 50 years to come. I really honestly think that. I feel like it's a cinema feat for horror, as far as physical, like the combination of physical effects and CGI. And it is really quite unnerving to watch, but just they did such a fantastic job with that.
Sean, those hooligans are in the park again.
Another part that I particularly liked to this is actually the dialogue. I think the dialogue in this movie is ridiculous, but in all the right ways.
I don't know.
Some of the characters don't make sense, particularly when I think it's the US guy from the embassy comes to see him in the hospital in England. But then he starts getting irate and he's really offended and he's like, excuse me, sir. It was just ridiculous.
I appreciate how upsetting this must be for you. Please, Mr. Kessler.
20 milligrams, Sagitol, IV, please.
I appreciate how upset you are, but this is no reason for hysterics. Mr. Kessler? Mr. Kessler, try not to excite yourself.
I love the comedy of the fact that like he's trying to get arrested, but he just can't get arrested because they're so like the running joke that they're just so polite in England. It's like, don't cause a scene, don't cause a scene. And then there's a call back to that later in the movie, and he's like, he even tried to get himself arrested.
You gonna arrest me? Don't you think you should arrest me?
I don't know. Perhaps he thinks it's a prank.
Frank!
David!
Look, I've had enough of this foolishness. All right, come on, there's nothing to see. Come on, move along. It's hopeless. Come on.
Let's go.
It's like, it's not hard to get yourself arrested after we've just seen a man fail to be arrested in England. I thought that was pretty good.
Thanks again.
As my partner pointed out,
Partner.
there's lots of funny parts in this movie, and it left us wondering as to whether or not it was deliberate. It is a comedy horror, and you can tell there's lots of deliberate humor throughout this, but there's kind of just some weird transitions and some weird dialogue where it was like, oh, was that meant to be something? Was that just badly acted, or was that actually meant to be funny?
You have lovely sheep.
As much as that sounds like a negative, that's actually something I thought added a layer of comedy to it that I enjoyed as well. So those are a few of my favorite things about the movie, particularly like the gore as well. Very gory for a 1981 horror movie, and particularly with his friend who he keeps seeing as a ghost, and every time you see him he's more and more decomposed. I love that as well.
Tying into that transformation scene, it's also just the nightmares that the character has, especially with like the Nazi wolf. So I remember watching it even as a kid, and especially rewatching it today, being like, oh fuck, I forgot about that part. Like it was just so different and so cool. Trying to think of an absolute highlight, but for me it is again the dream sequences. I think it really helps sell this movie.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Always love a good dream sequence, and
Same.
yeah, this movie does it well, particularly when they're, the camera angles of the POV view of going through the forest as well, and that feeling of I guess, becoming the wild man is always interesting.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like a 1981 movie. There's a shot where it's the love interest when she goes to approach the guy after he's been shot by the police. And as she's walking up the laneway, I put on some more modern clothing, and you could call this like a 2000s or 2010s type movie. Like it's just really well done in that aspect. There were a couple of sequences I really did like. The sort of the one where the family are at home and open up the door and it's just like an ambush of everyone getting shot. It was so random, everything was going on at once. I thought that was really cool. As you guys both mentioned, the transitioning of the wolf I thought was really well done. And that's where I was like looking at it going, is it CGI? Like it was really well done. I just thought the effects in that were really like well done. And I was just thinking it's a 1981 film, doesn't feel like it in that sense. And I particularly like the scene outside the sex club or the cinema, what do you want to call it, where it's just, I think this is where the piss take happens, where everyone's just hitting everyone with the cars, and then someone, so I think there's a guy on the ground and he gets squashed by the tire. I just thought like, this wouldn't really happen at this, like they're not doing high speeds in this area, but It was just like a convolute of just shit upon shit going on. So I thought that was really good as well.
Actually, it kind of comes back to our last episode on House on Haunted Hill.
Who the fuck are all of you?
about how the ending was kind of abrupt. I thought this was even more abrupt than that. And I had a big problem with that, particularly the fact that throughout the movie, I mean, I know it was just the character of David, who was talking about how he was convinced that he had to be killed by someone that loved him. Although that doesn't happen, and nor did that happen when the original werewolf gets killed in the countryside either. So I guess that makes sense, but it just kind of, I wondered why they had that built up throughout it when it isn't actually her that shoots him. And then, of course, the movie does just end.
Well, at least it didn't end like The Sopranos, where it just cut to black in mid-sentence.
Which is funny considering, as you mentioned, that crazy scene where all the cars are just piling into one another and it's just almost like a slapstick scene, that part at that point with everybody crashing. And I don't know if either of you noticed this, but the nurse Alex Price, his I guess love interest in this movie, she was one of the foster parents in Child's Play 2. I don't know if either of you noticed that.
Is this your idea of a joke?
I immediately noticed it and I was like, oh yeah, okay, all right. It's time for this actor to redeem herself. And I kind of feel like her performance was kind of disjointed. It was kind of disjointed from everybody else. It never, like, her performance never really matched the energy of what was going on.
What?
That's probably the funniest sex scene I've ever seen in my life. The way she, like, they were kind of like half biting, half kissing each other. And yeah, I don't know. That's definitely up there of just like one of the weirdest, most awkward sex scenes I've ever seen.
The sex scene made me piss myself laughing. For me, it is... But I don't actually know if I would consider it a bad thing. Maybe just something that needed a lot of improvement.
Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it. Promise? Okay, everybody take some rubbers.
I would have liked something a bit more touching in the ending. Maybe like he realizes what he's done, and instead of, you know, being dead on the ground in his human form, maybe he does survive and there's like an additional sequence or something, you know, not to copycat from Scream 4. Maybe he's in the hospital and it's like him and his love interest like sharing a moment, and there could have been like an ominous ending where like maybe he's in the hospital bed, they hug and kiss or whatever, and then like he opens his eyes and he's still got like the yellow tit or something.
The abrupt ending kind of just left a bit of like a sour taste in my mouth, or just a bit of like a, I think it was even worse than House on Haunted Hill.
How do we get down from here?
Just was so bizarre that they just like cut it off. Like it felt like there was another scene that was needed and it just got cut due to like time constraints or something.
David, it's David.
And the only other thing that kind of like really annoyed me with this movie is at the start where they go to the bar and then they sort of feel like they're not welcome. So they go back outside and then they're just walking in the field, but they don't know where they're walking. And it just kind of like annoyed me that the guy was just like, let's just keep walking. But even I'm like, do you even know where you're going in the dark?
Yeah.
Like it just sort of seemed really stupid. That was like the thinking, instead of being like, well, let's go back inside or hang near the building, which is what I would have done.
My name is Laura Zera. I'm a survival specialist, and I've been practicing and teaching wilderness survival for over 17 years.
Yeah, that was sort of really it. I couldn't really, I was more like I said, more impressed with the CGI, and I think that was sort of winning me over in the end.
I will not accept this.
I've dug up a little bit of trivia. There wasn't a lot, but there was a couple of points here that I thought were kind of interesting. David Naughton, who plays the main character, David Kessler, had previously been promoting Dr. Pepper for 4 years in commercials. The company ended their association with him after he appeared naked in this movie. Ironically, David was cast after John Landis reportedly saw one of these Dr. Pepper commercials. So Dr. Pepper got him another gig, but it means he lost his Dr. Pepper gig. That's a shame. Come on, Dr. Pepper. There's nothing shameful about the human body. Get over it.
No, Dr. Hershey hasn't come back yet. Yes, I will. But I feel so helpless just sitting around here doing nothing.
Rick Baker and John Landis had several disagreements over what the design of the werewolf should be. Baker wanted it to be a two-legged werewolf, saying he thought of werewolves as being bipedal, while Landis wanted a four-legged hound from hell. I feel like we almost saw bits of both of that particularly in the transformation scene. But it seems like for the most part, they went with Landis's vision of, a four-legged hound from hell, which is pretty good. John Landis regretted having to cut some things down to get an R rating in the US. Notably, the sex scene between Alex and David had to be made less explicit, as well as a shot of undead Jack trying to eat a piece of toast that falls out of his torn throat. I thought that would have been pretty interesting to see, considering the way that they approached gore in this movie. That would have been pretty good. John Landis does regard this as his masterpiece. So it's obviously, the movie that he has the most pride in, which is pretty cool. Very good movie.
You really scared me, you shithead.
I always love shit like this, censored for TV type stuff. David's famous line, "I'm a fucking werewolf for God's sake," had to be dubbed over with, "I'm a famous werewolf," for the TV airing.
Thank God. Should have just
It's
cut
so
it out.
silly.
Yeah.
I love how sensitive the 80s is, but then I remember it's 2023 and conservatives in America are like, rare drag shows, rare trans people. And it's like, nothing's really changed, has it?
Jenny Agutter almost turned down the role of Alex, as she was reluctant to do a horror film. She's glad she didn't and is proud of how beloved it's been over the years. I'd probably say as well, this has probably got a reason as to why she would have been cast in Child's Play 2, as well as being sort of like a veteran of the horror genre as well.
Get away from me!
As I mentioned, I really enjoyed this. It had been a massive gap between the first time I saw this and seeing it recently. I feel like it, in a lot of ways, it stands up better this time when I watched it, because I'm older, I'm not a kid anymore. I understand more of the jokes and kind of like the stylistic choices throughout the movie. So I'm going to give this 8.5 full moons out of 10.
I've lost my mind. I woke up in the zoo.
Still tossing up between what to give this movie, because I do think I will watch this again and again, maybe once every 3 to 4 years, or it'll be a movie I introduced to like my little sister, my little brother, because it does have that replay value. So I'm going to say 8. I'm going to say 8 nightmare sequences out of 10.
Are you all right now?
Yeah, as I said, I had a pretty good time with this. A couple quirks here and there, but like I said, doesn't really feel like an 80s movie, which is a good thing. I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 car crash sequences.
What does that bring our average to?
7.5.
7.5, or yeah, I think about 7.5. Yeah, very good, very good. Nice rating for a classic.
I really don't know.
For final thoughts on this movie, as I just mentioned, it's a classic. I feel like it still stands the test of time as far as the physical effects and the CGI. Believe it is the oldest werewolf movie I've ever seen. I'm trying to think of a prior example. I think even The Howling was sort of around the same time as this movie. I could be wrong. So I feel like it definitely set the course for a lot of werewolf movies that we've seen since. I like, Justin, that you mentioned Cursed. I feel like that's something we should definitely cover at some point.
Yeah.
Because the name of that movie is also what that production was as well. So interesting. But yeah, I feel like if you're into horror, you want to check out a werewolf movie, I mean, this is where you start. This is absolutely where you start. And it's both a funny time, it's a gruesome time, and it's, as I mentioned before, it's a movie that people are going to be talking about for a very long time. It's in the eons of the classics of horror. Justin, have you got any final thoughts for An American Werewolf in London?
I would encourage our listeners, all 32 of them, I'm joking, but on a serious note, no, I think people should take a chance with 80s horror movies, especially as someone like me who didn't really give 70s, 80s horror movies a chance until we started doing this podcast. You realize very quickly that there are a lot of elements in older movies that are way better, if not copied directly, in modern day horror movies. So definitely check it out. This one is a really great, I would say, entry-level starter. You know, if you think, oh, I want to explore 70s movies, I want to explore 80s movies, but I don't want something graphic like, you know, I Spit on Your Grave. definitely check An American Werewolf in London out. Also, don't make the mistake I did today by watching American Werewolf in Paris first, because you won't understand what the hell is happening if you haven't seen this movie first. But I'd also say keep an open mind, but also don't be afraid to laugh while watching some of these movies, because yes, some of them are quite dated, but it's really important for its time and a huge part of the cultural zeitgeist, especially with horror. So check it out.
I think this is a good entry level into any horror movie fan that wants to check out something in the 80s if you don't want to watch like Halloween or I Spit on Your Grave. I think this is a good entry to watch. I wouldn't be deterred that a werewolf movie is just like some crap fantasy. I think it does a really good job. It's shot really well, as we've all sort of discussed. It doesn't feel like a 1981 film. It feels much more modern, which is really interesting considering we've done a lot of the 80s films so far in our show or in our podcast and YouTube series. And I think this is one of the better sort of versions of an 80s film that feels a lot like a 2000s even, or late 90s. And there's good comedy effects, good like sequences, good CGI. It's good viewing, and it does have some decent replay value. And again, another one that would be interesting to see a remake, which I did see there was plans, but nothing concrete yet.
I just want to say thank you, BP and Justin, for joining me to discuss An American Werewolf in London.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, listeners, and lurkers, we have plenty more episodes in our back catalogue, everything from 80s gems to the absolute worst horror movies and the best franchises. If you like this episode, like, comment, and share all that shit. And if you hated this episode...